Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with a remarkable guest. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today, I'm thrilled to welcome General Charles Flynn. General Flynn is a highly respected leader with decades of distinguished service in the U.S. Army. Through his years of operational experience, he developed the foundational skills and principles that have guided his personal life and his professional career. Over the course of his tenure in the Army, General Flynn has held a variety of key leadership roles at every echelon, from tactical to strategic levels. He has extensive operational experience in Asia and the Indo-Pacific region, where he has played a critical role in advancing the United States' strategic interests, fostering alliances, and enhancing regional security. General Flynn is widely recognized for his expertise in executive leadership, strategic risk analysis, technical integration, and data-driven decision-making. Drawing on his extensive national security and military experience, he has demonstrated a unique ability to assess complex challenges, identify opportunities, and implement solutions that align strategic objectives with operational realities. These skills have proven invaluable not only in his military roles, but also in enabling national security initiatives through collaboration with the private sector. His ability to bridge military and civilian expertise ensures the development of innovative approaches to safeguarding critical infrastructure, strengthening public-private partnerships, and advancing the U.S. national security priorities. Known for his innovative thinking, ability to inspire teams, and unwavering dedication to the mission, General Flynn has also made significant contributions to joint, multinational, and Army modernization efforts and operational readiness. His service is marked by a commitment to fostering the growth of others, emphasizing mentorship, collaboration, and a values-driven leadership approach. Well, welcome to Tipping Spears, General Flynn.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Hannah. I appreciate you asking me to speak to your audience and share some thoughts and ideas about things that are important to national security.
Well, I've been excited about talking with you. So can you start us off this morning by telling us where your story begins?
It begins in the in a large family, but in a small state. So I grew up in Rhode Island. I'm one of nine. I'm the eighth of nine actually. So five boys, four girls. My father was drafted into the Second World War in 1943. I remember often him saying, when in 1941 he was a sophomore in high school, so he would say, we all kind of knew what we were going to do when we got out of high school, and I actually think that that mindset, um, at least when I was a young man, it did have an impact on me. So, anyways, my father stayed in the Army for 20 years, served in the Second World War, fought in the Korean War. Um, but I would say, my parents um, and their focus on, sort of sports, school, family, faith. I mean, I think those things were really important and sort of fundamental to the early years of your cycle of maturity, so to speak. And I think a sense of service came from both of my parents. My mother was very active politically, but really didn't start that until after she had her nine children, and then but she did decide to go to uh, law school when she was 60. She finished law school when she was 64. I mean, I'm 62, so
Oh,
and then she ended up passing her bar and then worked as a lawyer for, I guess, about 7 or 8 years. And then she got tired of that and went and got a real estate license and became a realtor. I mean, so anyways, my mother and father were, sort of, I would say, central to that beginning.
no, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
So what, you kind of got this sense of service from your family. What prompted you to make the decision to serve in the military yourself?
Well, a little bit of economics and a little bit of teamwork, I guess. I mean, I was again, being one of nine, we really didn't have much by way of money. So so ROTC was looked a little bit appealing to me. Although I would classify myself as the reluctant cadet, I don't really think I don't know if I wanted to go, in the military, full bore then. But I do think that there was always this sense of being on a team. The youthful zeal of wanting to be outside and physical and all that kind of thing. Um, I was majoring in I was in the business school, and I don't know if I knew what I wanted to do, but I knew what I didn't want to do, and I didn't want to go work in a bank or uh, go be an accountant or go get a financial management job at Wall Street or something like that. I find myself after 2 years taking the ROTC classes, and then some of those NCOs and officers down there were interesting to me. Of course, a number of years ahead of me, 5 in fact, my brother Michael had been over at the university, but he was on an ROTC scholarship. And again, back to my reluctance at the time, I'm not sure that's exactly what I wanted to do. But anyways, I guess that interest. Brought that on for me, and it became a bit of a catalyst for my career, I think. Um, so those NCOs and officers, I mean, Major Watson, Sergeant First Class Kane, Lieutenant Colonel McNamara, the fact that I actually can remember their names after these many
Mhm.
years is, tells you the impression that they had on me.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear. Every guest I've had on the show here has these key individuals at those kind of like pivotal times in their career journey that just make a lasting impression.
Mm, mhm. Yeah, I mean, you know, as they say, the impressionability of youth, right? So, I mean, I was young at the time. Again, I, I was pretty sure what I didn't want to do, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And the Army seemed like, as particularly as I got deeper and deeper into ROTC, I went to summer camp, at Fort Bragg and came back. I remember the PMS at the University of Rhode Island said, "How'd you think you did this summer when we got back to school?" And I was sort of, I don't know, I guess I did okay. He's like, "Well, you did really well. You came out, very top in the class and all that kind of jazz." And, um, and then he kind of chuckled at me like, this is probably going to go well for you commissioning wise. I can't tell you one way or the other. And I thought, oh, okay. I think I said something like, does that mean I'm going to have a job at the end of this? He sort of laughed and said, get out of my office. And that was the end of that. But yeah, but those individuals made an impression on me. And, I think I think many have an impression from their commissioning source, whether it's, through ROTC or West Point or OCS.
So I know, every journey has its hurdles. What are some of the biggest obstacles that you faced in your career, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think and I think many junior officers go through this. One, when sort of, you know, a captain or even major, you're you're at that point, like, do I stay or do I go? Is this what I see myself doing, back then, like 20 years? Again, I think my reluctance as a cadet, stayed with me for a period of time. Um, I do remember, after my first assignment saying I wanted to command a company. And so I ended up going to the 82nd and commanding a company. But, I'd gotten married. My wife and I had our first child. Um, I met my first battalion commander in the 82nd was a gentleman by the name of John Vines, J.R. Vines. And he was absolutely, formative uh, in my mind in terms of an example and a role model. He was tough. He was probably the harshest, toughest, most disciplined, and I would say, the best trainer um, that I was ever around. But yet he had this way of at least reaching me, um, and that really did, um, form in my mind. Well, maybe this is something that I can find my way in. Um, in fact, I've often said through the years that was he was an individual like I wanted to be more like him and less like myself. In a way, it was sort of like, as a youth, you're like, well, maybe I want to be more like my dad and less like
Mhm.
myself. He was sort of that first, I think, impression in the Army for me where I was like, wow, he's demanding and tough, but I needed that and I appreciated it. And so that stayed with me. Um, but like many, I mean, so I guess that was the first junction where I made a decision. Uh, the next time was as a major, I was out in Hawaii. I made a decision, make a career choice to stay in one job versus going to another one. And that upset some people, but I stayed, and I stayed because my wife had a good job. We had a nice house. I was a major. I was in what I thought to be a great job. Um, my oldest daughter walked out the back door to school. We had at that point three children. So, it was one of those choices that I made at the time. It probably closed off some other avenues for me later, but it was a choice I made, and I did what I did. And then I guess I'll just jump forward, because you're talking about obstacles. I mean, I made some decisions as a general officer that others didn't like, and it cost me some pain and agony and anguish over, a range of things, whether they be, unfavorable decisions, not popular decisions, or ones where I was taking discipline actions against individuals that had done wrong. But um, it was a different time during those years, and I think the chain of command was under attack in many ways from individuals that had an ability to, if they didn't like the discipline that was being administered, then they just counterattacked at the chain of command and the ones that were making the decisions, um, and had the responsibilities to make those decisions. But nonetheless, look, I've got no complaints. I mean, it was a wonderful 39 years, and I wouldn't, uh, I'd do it all over again. Do it all over again. It was wonderful.
So you've commanded everything from Ranger companies to the United States Army Pacific, which is the Army's largest service component command, spanning more than half the globe. What leadership strategies remain constant regardless of, the rank, and which evolved as your responsibilities grew?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I mean, I think first of all, you're leading, more and more people. So that becomes a central element of your ability to inspire, to motivate, to influence, to shape. So, with that as a backdrop, what I would say is that I think being able to, regardless of whether you're at the tactical, operational, strategic level, I think being able to communicate um, a sense of purpose, a sense of identity, a sense of mission, um, to provide both the individual and the organization with a vision and a roadmap of where your organization needs to be, where you are and where you need to be. It's sort of, again, being able to chart a course for the organization, but also at the same time have individuals understand how they fit within that larger um, context is really important, and how their role, their function, their position, their responsibilities, and their authorities are part of the greater path that the organization is following. I mean, I think that's true as a platoon leader. I think that's true as a company commander. Um, I think it's true as a battalion commander and as a four-star commanding general. So, um, and I think you know, the maturation and the path that you follow, I think that is a really important aspect of it.
Mhm.
One other thought here, and maybe I probably wasn't as good when I was a junior officer, but I think, as I watched individuals that I respected over the years, one of the things that I find really interesting about being a senior officer and an important trait is just to have this sense of intellectual curiosity so that uh, you recognize you don't know everything and you need good people around you, but you also need to go to those topic subjects or organizations that you don't understand so that you begin to have a better understanding of what that organization looks like. And again, that's true at the tactical level. When you're a captain or a major and you don't understand what's happening in another organization, maybe that's the place you need to spend the most time. And I think that as well is true as a senior general officer, maybe more true as a senior general officer.
I really like the term intellectual curiosity. I think a lot of folks tend to, the areas that are in their lane of established expertise is kind of the comfort zone. And so
Sure.
I
Yeah.
hope,
Well, I
uh,
mean, I'll tell a story. I think, and I again, probably back to your earlier question there. I mean, I do think that it's storytelling is a really important part of a senior leader's role because it is in stories that you illuminate your experiences for others so that those others may be able to grab that picture and then apply it intellectually to what they're doing. So I'll give you a story. When became, I was the first brigade combat team commander of the 1st Brigade Combat Team in the 82nd Airborne Division. I had commanded a battalion in the Army of Excellence, and this is from 2002 to 2004. So, but we had deployed, and the battalions in the division and the Army had not modularized yet, but the global war on terror had just started. So I went after battalion command. I became the G3 for the United for 82nd Airborne Division. And while I was the G3 from 2004 to 2005, before the War College, we wrote and we reorganized the division. We rewrote we stood up 4th Brigade, we disassembled the Combat Aviation Brigade, we disassembled the Division Support Command, et cetera, et cetera. And two parts to this story. I remember when we were writing and going through the planning to change the division. I remember going to the division commander, and his name was Bill Caldwell at the time, and I said to him, "Sir, when we disassemble the main support battalion inside the division support command, the old DISCOM, the 82nd Airborne Division cannot rapidly deploy anymore because it was like the muscle behind the ability to deploy." And, he sort of looked at me with a bit of a flabbergasted, well, we're going to have to overcome that. And I said, I agree. Now we'll have to go back and figure out how we're going to do that. That's part one of the story. The second part of the story is now I leave the G3 job and I came back to the very brigade that I was a battalion commander in and had been the G3 of that division. I came back to it, and the day I took command was the day that it had converted into a brigade combat team. So in that brigade combat team, I had two infantry battalions, but all the other four battalions were these unique like a fires battalion, a sustainment battalion, a special troops battalion. And I remember telling the infantry battalion commanders in my in the brigade, I said, listen, if you never see me, it's not because I don't love you. It's because I know exactly what's going on in your battalions because I commanded 2504. I commanded one of them, you know. I said, I really have to spend time with like the artillery battalion and the support battalion and the special troops battalion because I've never been an intelligence company commander. I've never been a forward support company commander. I've never been an FDC chief. You know, so the point I'm making here is like I needed to go spend time with the organizations that I did not understand or fully appreciate. And I say that, Hannah, back to the conversation or the comment I made earlier about intellectual curiosity. I learned at that juncture in my career that you had better go and spend some time around organizations and people that you are not familiar with. And if it makes you uncomfortable, get over it because that's where your greatest learning is going to occur, particularly the more senior you get and the more, I would say, protected or cloistered, the orbit or, the derogatory comment is like the moat guards that maintain control of you, you know. So, anyways, that's that's a longer version of and commentary on intellectual curiosity and why I think it's so important as a senior officer.
Yeah, it's a great example of kind of also, the dangers of not stepping outside your comfort zone and developing intellectual
Yeah.
curiosity.
Right.
It may get uncomfortable when you're no longer qualified.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great example. So the Indo-Pacific has been a big part of your service. How would you describe the Army's role in shaping stability and deterrence in a region that's often viewed through a maritime lens?
Yeah. Well, I'm very public about the Army's role out in the Indo-Pacific. I think it is wildly misunderstood and
Mhm,
underappreciated.
mhm,
Um, and there's a range of reasons behind it, from historical bias to the bias of it being, simply an air and maritime theater. Um, so what is it that people misunderstand? Well, I think people misunderstand that the reality across the Indo-Pacific or Asia and the archipelagic land bridge that connects the Asian continent to the Australian continent, and then, the vastness of Micronesia,
mhm,
Polynesia, Melanesia, Oceania, the islands out there, um, is that actually the security architecture that binds that region together are its armies. They are the dominant in size, and I would say the dominant institutions for security inside each of these countries. So, a couple of facts. The Indian military is 80% Army,
wow.
Thailand, 75% Army, Vietnam, 80 to 85% Army. Indonesia is 17,500 islands, it's 75% Army. The Philippines have more divisions than we do. 70% of its military is its army. I could go on and on. The point I'm making is they don't have big navies and air forces, which is why it's so important for the United States Navy and Air Force to be sizable and in position because they keep the global commons open, the global commons of the sea lanes and air traffic. Now, what is not understood is that actually the relationships, the human to human element in the Indo-Pacific is largely bound together because on the ground, these armies and our army have a immediate connection. And then if you add in the Marine Corps, the Special Operations Forces, and the United States Army and the enormous size of the armies in the region, what I say is that is actually the security architecture that binds the region together because it's at a very, very human level. And if you want to understand what's going on in the security situation in each side, in each one of these countries, is that you have to get out and you have to get into the interior of it and see the people, see the districts, see the community, see the politics that's unfolding, see the tribal way, the ethnic, the religious, the language, all of it, the cultural, societal aspects of what's actually happening inside of these countries are best viewed with a fingertip feel of being out into the interior. You can't fly over that and you can't sail by that. You have to be in it and you have to be in it repeatedly. And I think that that is a major part of what is misunderstood about the strategic environment of the Indo-Pacific. And so my point has been that land power and the land power network is actually the great asymmetric advantage that the United States has against the Chinese because the strategic architecture and our network of allies and partners is the greatest counterweight that we have to the Chinese. The communist Chinese party too, not the Chinese people,
Mhm.
the party itself. So um, yeah, that to me is Hannah is probably the greatest, again, misunderstood uh, and not well represented aspect of how the United States has a incredible advantage over, foe, adversary, enemy in that part of the world. So it's underrepresented, misunderstood, and I will continue to profess that because of my experiences out there and what that has meant.
Yeah, well, you provided such a great description of the role like land power plays there. I think even myself, I'm assuming, it's Navy, it's Air Force with our partners over there. It's so interesting to hear that Army is the majority of their fighting force.
Yeah. Well, again, I know I've made this comment before, but again, I think harping away at it, when most people look at the map, they see a lot of blue,
Yeah,
so they immediately think, air
ships.
and right, air and maritime. And again, while that's incredibly important, it's undoubtedly a reason why we have to maintain a level of security and maintain a Navy and Air Force and now space and cyber forces that
Mhm,
are, you know, that are world class.
mhm,
Okay, but when I look at the map, I don't see blue. I see people, I see territorial integrity, I see geography, I see the geometry of the geography, I see borders, and I see their national sovereignty. And for as much time as I do have out there, one thing I can tell you about each of those countries in that region of the world, they have as much pride in their country as we do in ours. So they want to protect their people. They want to defend their territorial integrity. They want to uh, be, the ones to defend their national sovereignty. We just have to enable um, and allow them to do that. And I think, this is an important part of what's going on today with new strategic documents from the National Security Strategy and the
mhm.
National Defense Strategy.
So how has the Indo-Pacific changed, kind of during your years of service and, since you're in command there and kind of
Yeah.
what of these shifts concern you the most today?
Yeah. Again, I think the Communist Chinese Party and the threat from China,
Mhm.
that has changed the most. And again, I'll tell a story. So I was in the 25th Division as a field grade officer, as a major from uh, uh, 97 to 2000. And I left, in my typical rotations. But then, of course, 2001, 9/11 occurred and the global war on terror started. Well, what also happened in 2001 was China was allowed into the WTO and
Mhm.
allowed the favored trade nation status. Um, okay, so I'm going to jump ahead to 2014. So from 2000, I left 2000 in the 25th, and we had done a lot of, I've been to Korea multiple times, I've been to Thailand a couple of times, been to Australia, been out to Japan. We had been training out in the region. Um, but when I came back in 2014, just before I went out to take command of the 25th Division, mind you, now the last 14 years, it had been, everything in Iraq and Afghanistan. In 2014, I took command in April, and about January or February of 2014, my brother Mike was the director of DIA, and
Mhm.
he called me. I 2 days at DIA, and I'll put you in front of our Chinese experts, um, to begin to understand what you're going out to do. This is 2014. I did that for 2 days. They threw the kitchen sink at me. It was fantastic. And I got in my car and I was driving back to Fort Bragg. And about a month and a half later, I was going to go to Hawaii to take command of the 25th Division. I got stuck in traffic in Springfield, literally like bumper to bumper, go nowhere kind of thing. And I finally had a few hours at that point to pause about what had just happened to me for 2 days. And it dawned on me that for the last 14 years, I knew where Kabul,
Mhm.
Kandahar, Baghdad, Helmand was, and I knew everything about Iraq and Afghanistan, but I didn't know a damn thing about what was going on, in China and what was happening across the Asia Pacific. So it became clear to me then that I had a lot of learning to do. And I think that Hannah was a catalyst for me when I got out to Hawaii in April of 2014, not knowing at the time that the next, decade I was almost going to be out there exclusively with, three different assignments: the division commander of the 25th, the deputy commander of U.S. Army Pacific. I came back to DC, be the Army Chief of Operations as a G357, and went right back to be the commander of U.S. Army Pacific. I didn't realize at the time I was going to spend that much time, but I knew that I needed to learn more about the threat that was emerging. So, to your question, I think that I am emblematic. Or that story is illustrative of actually the country.
Mhm.
My, time in uniform for those 14 years, 2001 to 2014, was all about the Middle East.
Mhm.
And while that was going on, China was on a trajectory that I still, I say this today, is a dangerous one. And then you look at everything that they have done and what they continue to do. Um, we have some catching up to do, but I think that story, points to the fact, me as an individual in, in the Army as a commissioned officer. I mean, I think like the country, we were busy with things in the Middle East and we were not paying attention to what they were doing. And that that has been, in my opinion, the thing that has changed the most dramatic. And one other story. In 2015, I was the division commander, but what was happening that people don't really, understand is in 2015, the reorganization of the Chinese military, their commands and the way they had organized their formations was catching up with their modernization efforts, like the buildup of their Army, their Navy, their Air Force, their industrial strength had really, landed, if you will. And then they put in place training centers. They were basically taking a page out of our book. And so, now it's 2020, barely 2026, but let's call it that decade. That decade has been when they built up uh, this A2AD arsenal and the juggernaut of at least the military instrument that they have created. And that's separate, but it is connected to espionage, to information warfare, to lawfare, um, to the corrosive and corruptive way with which they approach their operations globally. I refer to their path through three words that start with an I. They've been on an incremental, insidious, and irresponsible path to
Mm,
undermine the United States and the West. And their first aim is to gain regional hegemony. And then their ultimate goal is global dominance. And they've stated it publicly, they've stated it in writing, they and they continue to state it. So that's the thing that has changed the most in my view since my time in the late 90s, before the global war on terror and before, again, the United States became so ensnared in wars in the Middle East.
yeah, you make a great point about how China wasn't even on folks' radar for so long. It was just all Middle East, and it felt kind of like a sleeping giant, at least from my perspective of like, these things are going on, it's coming out of China. To your point, they're very forthcoming with what they're doing, like their goals. They're out there. This
Yeah,
isn't
I mean,
like
like most authoritarian, dictatorial,
yeah.
totalitarian foes. I mean, they tell you what they're doing. But sometimes we just need to pay more attention to what they're doing.
Yeah. Do you think that we're, as a nation, as far as like national security and defense, are we paying enough attention to China now? Like, have you seen the needle be moved, in a positive direction on that, or do you think we're still just not comprehending this kind of reality of a near peer adversary and the threats they present?
No, to your question, yes, I think I would say I've seen the needle move, but I've seen it move more recently,
Mhm.
uh, you know, faster than it had before. I mean, I um, I was out there again in 2014. I arrived out there in command, and the Obama administration had quote unquote pivoted in
Mhm.
the 2012, 2013, but it didn't manifest into anything that was like you could sink your teeth into.
Okay.
And I would say that that happened for really, until I'm going to say I went back out as a four-star. I don't know if it really changed much. And even then, I would say it was pretty light. Um, so I guess the point to your question is I don't think there's been a stark reality until recently about how damaging
Mhm.
and how insidious and irresponsible the Communist Chinese Party has been following, and I think it's only beginning now to become more evident
Mhm.
in the minds of the American
Mhm.
citizens, and
Mhm.
and still, then I believe we still have a problem. Again, I'm going to go to stories here, um, and distractions. So, in late April, early May of 22, I'm in a country in Southeast Asia. The the Russians had crossed into Ukraine in February. And I was there and I was getting ready to go out to training with the chief of staff of the country's army, the chief of defense, who was also the former army chief and now their chairman equivalent, and the minister of defense were there. But the chief of army and the Chad were sort of standing next to each other. They came up to me, and the chief of army I knew quite well, and he says, are you kidding me? Did you see what happened this morning in the news? And I said, and I sort of acted surprised. I had a little idea where he was going. He said, I said, well, no, what are you referring to? He said, well, your country announced a $33 billion support package to Ukraine for the war in Ukraine and Russia. And he said to me, are you kidding me? Like, what's going to happen now? Like, are you pivoting or are you not pivoting? And the reason I tell that story is that, even though there was this tone of pacing threat and priority, it really never happened. I'll go to another indication of this. So when you have a regional war going on in Europe with the Russia-Ukrainian war, and then you have another regional war going on in the Middle East, and then you have other little, I'll say, flashpoints across the globe. Those two major regional wars were a substantial distraction from our ability to actually focus on the Indo-Pacific and the Chinese adversary. I'll tell this through a story of resources against priorities. So I'm the Army commander in the Pacific. Again, back to my earlier commentary, people misunderstand, misrepresent, and malutilize the Army's importance out in the Indo-Pacific, to include my own Army. Okay. And then I go to Europe and I see what's going on. And here's the resources that Europe had to fight or support and enable, because they weren't even fighting. Well, I shouldn't say that. They were enabling the Ukraine army and against the Russian army, Russian military. So the resources that they had to do that, they had their base budget, they had the European Defense Initiative, and then they had these massive supplementals, i.e., the first one I just mentioned earlier was $33 billion that were going over to Ukraine to support the Ukrainians against the Russians. Well, what did I have to operate out in the Pacific? I had my base budget, and even that was being chipped away at. So, the point that I'm making here is like, if that is your priority and you have a finite amount of resources, then you have to make some hard choices. And in my view, we weren't making hard choices about the problems that we were having out in the Indo-Pacific, namely the Communist Chinese Party and all that military was doing to place at risk our network of allies and partners and our security situation in the region. So to your question, do I think we've paid enough attention to it? No. Now, I will go further. And I'm going to stitch together two documents and two operations. And I just came back from the Honolulu Defense Forum last week. So uh, first Operation Midnight Hammer into Iran to basically, destroy the nuclear capabilities of Iran. Then we had a document come out called the National Security Strategy. Right on the heels of that, we had Operation Absolute Resolve here in Venezuela, a strategic raid, uh, a law enforcement lead to capture a international criminal. And then we just last week or just a couple days ago, we had the National Defense Strategy that was published. So you have two operations, and then you have two documents that are strategic guidance, but then you also have two operations that were strategic surprises. They use the element of surprise, but they are without question a demonstration of our capability, our posture, our readiness, our will, and our messaging to do these things. And so, in my view, my view is that there's a sense that deterrence has returned for the United States, and for two reasons. One, if you look at the tactical and operational proficiency of our forces, um, foe or adversary or enemy can realize that they are going to be beaten because we do have enormous reach and enormous lethality, and no one should ever underestimate the tactical and operational reach and lethality of the U.S. military. Secondly, I think that the strategic gain that the president and this administration have is that they are strategically unpredictable. Now, there'll be a lot of people that are allies and say, well, we don't want the unpredictableness from the United States. Well, actually, in terms of having a deterrent effect on your foe or enemy, the our adversaries need to understand that that level of unpredictability, where he is willing to pull the trigger, that feeds doubt, that that sows paranoia in their mind where they are not going to do something that is going to trigger a response. And so I in many ways find that to be very helpful. I remember years back we used to talk about being tactically unpredictable and strategically predictable. I actually think it's just the reverse now. I think strategically having the unpredictability is an important element of deterrence, while at the same time having tactical and operational predictability, knowing that the reach and the lethality of the U.S. military is world-class and second to none. You will get beaten. And I think that that's an important element of what's happening today. I'm I'm reflecting back to you, Hannah, things that I have picked up from my network, in my travels and my engagements with others.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's a great great kind of overview and a temp check, tying a couple different recent things together. I really appreciate that. I think a lot of folks aren't aware of how this is all kind of under a big umbrella of deterrence and national security. It's not, here's our favorite war going on here, or here's our
Yeah,
main
yeah,
operation. So you really gave a great example of how these things are so connected in kind of a broader approach.
yeah. Again, I mean, I think engaging with a number of folks both in the region and back here, really across the country. I think that's an important part. One part I probably haven't spent enough time talking about is our organic industrial base and defense industrial base, and how everything from the energy sector of oil and gas, um, to nuclear power, uh, to the I'll say the mining and critical mineral rare earth element, the creation through processing of the concentrates to actually make the things that we need in order to support our country and its manufacturing backbone, like batteries and magnets and semiconductors and steel and aluminum. The rebuilding of the energy sector, oil, gas, nuclear, LNG, the mining and the stores and our ability to process critical minerals and rare earth elements. And then other areas like pharmaceuticals, transportation, shipbuilding. I mean, all of these things really matter a great deal. And I think again, in the national security strategy, the fourth line of effort is basically rebuilding manufacturing for the organic industrial base and the defense industrial base so we can scale. We can scale. This is not, just-in-time logistics, an old label that we used to have. It has to be, you know, war is inherently wasteful, but what you're
Mhm.
trying to do is avoid war, prevent war, so that you don't waste lives. So if that means you have to have some excess, in order to be able to say, hey, I am boxing at 205
Mhm.
and you're boxing at 135. So
Mhm.
our weight is going to be a decisive advantage. And we need that through the mobilization efforts of our organic industrial base and defense industrial base. And I'm glad to see that element of this being really at the forefront of what the administration and really, the country is doing to regain control of our end-to-end supply chains.
Mm. I know, resilience is often discussed at an individual level, but you've talked about, organizational resilience. Can
Mhm.
you tell us kind of what makes an organization resilient and how a leader builds that, into formation?
Yeah, again, my comments earlier, I think, providing an individual and an organization, very difficult for, I think, the more senior you get,
Mhm.
but providing them a sense of purpose, identity, and mission through a vision is really, really important. Um, let me say this way, all new concepts come from some combination of taking a look at your current organizations and what you believe your future organizations should look like. They come from your current capabilities and then advanced capabilities, or the combination of legacy capabilities and new capabilities coming together. And then in the middle of that is technologies and current technologies, and then uh, advancing technology or so leap ahead technologies. I don't think that we spend enough time at the senior level helping individuals, senior flag officers, understand how those capabilities and organizational changes must be interwoven with the unbelievable pace of technological changes. And I think that the private sector is way ahead of us on these technological changes. And this is where I think the military kind of sells himself somewhat short. Those technological changes help with new capabilities. They help repurpose legacy capabilities. But what we're often slow to do is change our organizations.
Mhm.
That we tend to like say, well, this is what the battalion looks like, or brigade looks like, or the corps, or whatever, and we don't change the organizations. And those are almost the exclusive uh, area of general officers. And so I think that we need to be much more adaptive in our organizational changes as technology changes quicker and capabilities change quicker. And the only way we can do that is by weaving together experiments and exercises. In other words, when we train, every exercise that we do ought to have experimentation in it. And every experiment we do ought to be part of an exercise. And this is a way that the leaders can grapple with, how do I reorganize to best support what we're going to do? Again, I'll tell a story I think that's really important on this. Back in the 2018, 2019 timeframe, we were in the Army. We were on a path to um, have long-range precision fires, deep sensing, and other modernization efforts that we were building. And I'll point exclusively to hypersonic weapons, and then mid-range capable weapons like the Tomahawk and SM-6. And there are other, I mean, I could, talk through a landscape of them, but you get the point. These new systems, these new weapon systems, I'll just say these new things, we're going to take a few years to develop, okay? So this is 2018, 2019. It's now 2026. And just a few years ago, we actually put the batteries together of long-range hypersonic weapons and and the mid-range capable long-range fires, mid and long-range fires in the multi-domain task forces. So if you think about it, 2018, 2019, we didn't get the thing until 2023, 2024. Okay. So let's call that 5, 6 years. One of the things that we did back in the 2018, 2019 timeframe, and I give Secretary McCarthy and General McConville a lot of credit for this, was that they actually said, hey, we don't understand the multi-domain task force. We can't explain it. Congress doesn't understand it. Hell, our own forces don't understand it. We need to organize a multi-domain task force, and the organization needs to start working on it. And I remember they turned to me and said, we're going to pick this individual's name was Jim Eisenhower. He's actually now a lieutenant general out at Fort Leavenworth and basically they threw him out to Joint Base Lewis McChord and formed the first multi-domain task force. And we had like a table, a draft table of organization, but all we had was a leader and this like PowerPoint slide of how we should organize this this new organization. The reason I tell that story is that that organization in 2019, I'll call it, had a 5 year head start on the delivery of the things. And that organizational growth, learning what skills you needed, what were the talents that you needed, how to get organized, how do you fit into a theater army, how do you fit into the joint fight, how do you fit into the army, how do you train, how do you man, how do you equip? That to me is a great story of how if we're not more intellectually curious and adaptive and agile in our thinking on how we have to change our organizations faster. I don't have a better story than that right there. You have to change those organizations, even if you don't have all the information you need,
Mhm.
because you're going to get advanced capabilities, you're going to get new technologies, and you have to modify those organizations very quickly. Otherwise, they will be irrelevant. If we had given long-range hypersonic weapons and SM-6s and Tomahawks to a artillery battery or battalion or brigade in a normal organization, they would have looked at us like we had five heads. Like, what are you doing? We don't know what to do with this. So, and in addition to that, all the exquisite capabilities that came with the multi-domain task forces. So, anyways, the point I'm making here is I think that that is a great story that illuminates like why organizational adaptation and why organizational modernization and transformation has to happen like very quickly, and you have to do it even though you can't see the perfect picture. You just got to get the right leader in place, support them, and give them vision, give them identity, give them purpose, give them mission, and they're off to the races.
And it's such a great story. I think that kind of responsibility coming at folks that are change resistant, I could see how that would make them even more resistant, right? Panic, don't want to embark
And
on
big
something.
bureaucracies tend to protect, like, no, like we've always done it with this. So just take whatever that thing is and put it in this organization. It's like,
Mhm,
well, no, the organization isn't trained, it's not manned, it's not equipped,
mhm,
it's not organ, it doesn't understand what it's about to get. I mean, I I think all of us that were junior commanders over, tactical commanders in the Middle East, we got pieces of equipment over there that we had not been trained on, and it was new capability, and you're like, well, what am I supposed to do with it? I don't have an organization that can do that. And so you're adapting, you're building things on the fly if you like what you got. But if you don't like what you got and you don't have anybody in the organization that understands it, it sits in a conics and you never use it. And it may actually be the thing you need. But because you're not organized to actually integrate it,
mhm,
it sits in a conics and it doesn't work.
mhm. So you've led under intense time pressure, often when you don't have all the information that you would want when the stakes are really high. What can you tell us that you've learned about making those decisions? You don't have all the information, you don't know how this is going to play out.
Yeah.
And getting it wrong costs people their lives potentially. How do you
Yeah.
navigate that?
Well, first, I certainly have experiences where people's lives were lost or changed
Mhm.
dramatically um, because I didn't have all the information, or I waited, didn't wait, whatever the case may be. And I do think the harshness, at least in my generation, I think the harshness of that is, you know, imprinted on us forever. Um, Now, here's an equation that I'll use where I think, you have to become comfortable, and this is all a matter of risk. And risk is, there's risk to mission, there's risk to, um, the organization. There's a lot, I could lay out all kinds of risks here to highlight it. But at the end of the day, it's really the commander's comfort level with risk. At the end, in the military, it bears down really to how comfortable are they operating in risk. And I think most staffs and most commanders come to about a 60% solution and can, particularly really good staffs and good commanders, maybe they're even higher, maybe they're 65. But there's always an element of unknown, always an element of unknown. And I think the more senior you get, the more variables are in play. So there's a lot more that is probably unknown. But I also would say that, 60% solution plus about 20 or 25% of, again, the individual's uh, identity, the individual's sense of purpose, the organization's sense of purpose and mission, they are going to make up that other 25% because they'll not want to see it fail. So that gets you to about 80, 85. Well, guess what? That's about as good as you're going to ever get. And that may be even higher than most. But the point I'm making with the story is that, um, I don't think I realized that sort of equation when I was very junior, but it did begin to help me weigh, well, how much information do I actually need? How much more punishment am I going to give my staff to go track this down or track that down? And, or even me, how much am I going to do as a commander to do my own mission analysis, to put my own thought into this? What am I going to read? Who am I going to talk to? What information requirements do I need to make sure that I've got, at least in my mind, um, how much risk are we actually taking? And so I think that training your staff and training other individuals that you work with and training yourself to be able to be a bit uncomfortable in that art and science uh, equation, that I think that I think that's where you're you have to be you have to get more comfortable with incomplete information and be comfortable with the level of risk that you're about to decide to take. I also, one other point, I mean, and I think I was just blessed, I think, as a 2 and 3 and a 4 star. I mean, the people that were surrounding me uh, in those jobs, I had great trust in what they were doing. Um, and I think their ability to provide enough science to me so that I could be, more artful in my decisions
Mhm.
was really, really good. And then I think the other thing is that if they're able to be an extension of your thought, and be an extension of your sense of urgency, your level of risk, your tolerance for action. I mean, I think that that is a really powerful or a really empowering element of your subordinate leaders going out and doing things on your behalf and recognizing, that like this, I can decide to do without talking to him about it. This, I'm going to decide to do anyways, but I'm going to go tell him why I did it and what we're doing. And, even though you may not agree with every step of that, when they come in and say that, you got to be careful about how you respond. Because the minute you flip out on them, they're never going to do it again. And that's not what you need. Now, they, sometimes because you're the commander, you have the right to be able to go, stop. We're not doing that. Um, but on the other hand, I think 8 out of 10 times you kind of want to go, yeah, 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 that's fine. And you kind of go back in your office and you clench your teeth and go, I hope that goes good. But you know what? It does. That's the other 25%, right? Because now they're invested in it. Now it's like it's their call. And that's that buy-in you get uh over time. And I think that's a really important element of leadership. You know, you can write all kinds of books about it, but like practitioners know what that feels like.
Mm. Yeah. No, that's a great framework for approaching it. So character is a critical component of effective leadership. I think, if we asked anyone, they'd agree with us on that. But how the leaders build and then kind of protect ethical cultures, teams, organizations?
Well, I mean, I think, fundamental to all of this is training. I mean,
Mhm.
I think there's education training in the Army. There's actually, there's your tactical, operational exercising. But I think that, um, that training is fundamental to all of this. And then, obviously when training, um, you know, a sense of toughness, a sense of grit, a sense of discipline instilled in those that are at training and in training is really very, very important. I, you know, the way you framed it's like effective leadership requires character. Sure. And there's, again, there's tons of books written about character and how important it is to be an effective leader. But like, how do you do that?
Mhm.
And I think the point I'm making is that when you're a leader, you're responsible for training and that your authority to train your organization is yours and yours alone. And if you take a back seat to it and you're not involved in it, or it's not the foremost thing in your mind about the training that you are doing and your role in the importance of communicating that training. Um, I mean, then I don't think, and then you can't have a conversation with them about discipline, accountability, toughness, grit, because, you're not vested in it and they see that. So, you know, I would say character is built through toughness and training. And conversely, um, through training and having a degree of toughness in that training, you're gonna build character too, and you're gonna build the resilience or the ability to take a punch and get back up and do it, or the ability to you're not going to be successful every time. You're going to have flaws. You're going to make mistakes. I mean, the best units I was in were the ones that were the most critical of themselves because they were the ones that were like being candid and honest about their flaws and about what didn't go right, from the small to the big. Um, so again, I think that, at least in the military, although honestly, having been out of the military for a year now, and I've seen some companies, they have a pretty good, there's there's one in particular that has a pretty good internal training, uh, I'll say like leadership university to
Mhm.
talk about this. And I think that that's an important element of what's happening. And I think in many ways that the military and military leaders can help organizations with that, because we all need it. I mean, four-star general has to go to training just like a captain. And so I think it's an important element of what we do. You don't stop going to training because you're more senior. You have your own training that you have to do. It might be a little different than going to the rifle range, but that's the point, is that everybody's got a different role, everybody's got a different function, but everybody has to be trained.
Mhm. So today's young soldiers are entering, a very complex, highly contested, technologically driven environment. What capabilities do you think tomorrow's warfighters, must develop to be successful? What do you think is kind of like the critical have to have in terms of kind of like, I guess, training priorities?
Well, I mean, again, I use that term, the intellectual curiosity.
Mhm.
I mean, I do think, and I think our younger generation has that.
Mhm.
So I think honing those skills at a much more junior age, much more
Mhm.
junior level in
Mhm.
the military is important. I think they come instinctively with it. I think they're a lot more intuitive with technology than my generation was for sure.
Mhm.
Um, Now, juxtapose that to what I was just talking about.
Mhm.
I do think there's a physicality, at least in the military,
Mhm.
that you can't discount, and it has to be underwritten by time. There's a physical, mental, and just your personal investment in being able to withstand physically and mentally the harshness of the world
Mhm.
and the harshness of decisions and the harshness of evil, because it's
Mhm.
out there. And you know, I think that we have to continue to have that um, in our training. You know, people are going to be killed in training. People are
Mhm.
going to be wounded. They're going to be injured in training, and it's sad. It's tragic. But the reality of it is that if you give weapons and things that move at the speeds we're talking about, and you give um, explosive devices to young men and women, uh, then things are going to happen. And you can't turn away from that. It has to, it has to happen. Um, and unfortunate as it might be, there's a value in that. Again, I'll tell a story that, at the time I didn't think too much of it, but it really hit me later. Um, I was a division commander and I got a call like 4 in the morning, and it was a battalion commander who said, "Hey, sir, we've had a soldier get shot in the back. Um, he's on his way to the hospital. Don't know if he's going to make it. We've shut the range down, et cetera, et cetera." And I said, "Okay, thanks for the call. God bless what you're doing out there." And I said, "Listen, um, don't do anything till first light, but call me at 8 o'clock." So hung up, um, and he called me at 8 o'clock. I think I said, "Call me at 8 o'clock and tell me what you intend to do." Call me at 8 o'clock, and make a long story short, he said, "We're going to cancel the range. We're not going to do the training anymore. We're gathering all the blah 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 for the investigation, et cetera, et cetera." And I said, "Well, I agree with everything except for canceling the range." I said, "I think you need to be shooting again within 24 hours." Um, and so that ended. And fortunately, the individual that was hit, he lived, but he obviously had a lot of damages to him.
Mhm.
that individual was in command about 60 days. So on his outbrief, I went for a run with him. And and by the way, he wasn't like the best battalion commander, but he wasn't the worst. He was sort of an average, individual. And he says to me, he goes, "Sir, you can never realize the impact that that phone call had on me or my unit when you told us to go back to training and go back to live firing." Um, because they could see in my eyes through your words that, you know, that we were all willing to take risk in training so that, the greater good, which is everybody gets back to training and doesn't, wallow in sorrow about the tragedy that had just happened. And now I'm sure there are thousands of other stories from other generals and other officers. This is, I'm not the only one that did that. Okay, there's plenty of individuals that have done that. But when it happens to you, it becomes seared in your memory of the impact that a simple phone call I had at 8 o'clock in the morning after a live fire. And I later went out there that day, and talked with them and whatnot. But um, I mean, to your point, I think this is where, to your question on younger soldiers, I mean, there's an intellectual curiosity that they instinctively have, but I think we need to foster and grow that. And that's largely because technology is changing so much, capabilities are changing so much. But in my earlier comments, I think where we senior folks can help them is, hey, change your organization as well and make it
Mhm.
adapt. And then the other part of this that I think we need to do a better job on is there needs to be a little bit of in your face. There needs to be
Mhm.
an increase in toughness and grit and accountability and like holding people to task for what they actually have to do. That battalion commander's job was to train that battalion. It was not to,
Mhm.
walk away in fear or say this is too risky because we shot a guy in the back. Mistakes were made. Now move forward. You know, the front windshield of life is a hell of a lot bigger than the rear view mirror. So keep going forward.
I like that analogy. I hadn't heard that one before. So many young people, they want to make a difference, um, but a lot of them may not know, how. Maybe they don't come from a military family, or they haven't been exposed to these types of opportunities of public service. What guidance do you have to offer those who, feel called to serve, but they're not sure where to start?
Well, start with yourself first. I mean, like yourself, love yourself, respect yourself. And then I'd say, pick a path, um, and follow it with some passion. I mean, you may not pick the right path. You may not pick the right discipline. You may not pick the right, career. Um, but, at some point you've got to determine, hey, I'm gonna park here, or I'm gonna put
Mhm.
roots down here, or I'm gonna mow the grass here,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna make this right. I'm gonna get this right. And from that, other things will, you know, develop for you. And you can um, create that journey, you can create that path for yourself. But uh, if you continue to meander, and I think that then that perpetuates a sense
Mhm.
of questioning of yourself. And so, whatever it is, whatever you think you might be passionate about, you've got to land there and you've got to go do it. I didn't like, back to my story. I didn't know if being in the Army for a career was going to be right for me. As I said, I was a reluctant cadet, and I was reluctant all the way up until I commanded a company. And then, the variables in life take over. But then you're kind of, at one point, you're sort of like, hey, I got to mow the grass right here.
Yeah.
And so, I can't worry about the field over there or somebody else's yard. I got to
Mhm.
worry about my own. And I think today there's so many choices
Mhm.
and so many things to do that sometimes, um, you know, they don't like, pick a path or
Mhm.
start from a known point, right? Like,
Mhm.
in land navigation, when you're young, you can shift from a known point, but it's very hard to shift from an unknown point because you don't know where you are. Um, then it's called, retraction or
Mhm.
retracing your steps or something. So, but I mean, I do think that, yeah, my thoughts on this are, know yourself, like yourself, love yourself, invest in yourself, pick a path, follow your passion, and then, good things will happen to good people. You got
Mhm.
to put the work in.
Mhm.
And it's not going to be easy, Life it isn't easy.
Mhm.
It's a series of challenges along the way, how you react to those challenges, how you respond to those challenges, and how you grow from them
Mhm.
is the most important aspect of it, in my view.
Mhm. Mhm. Great, great perspective. So, what do you think our society is lacking most right now, when it comes to leadership, values, or even resilience?
I mean, I think so judgment, I
Mhm.
guess. I
Yeah.
think the your skills of choice, decisions, owning them.
Mhm.
I mean, I used to tell folks in counseling that, particularly the more senior you got, or if they were, selected to be a battalion commander
Mhm.
or a brigade commander or division commander or any commander really, that went through like a very selective process
Mhm.
in the Army. And I would say this is true in business as well. I mean, I don't think generally speaking, we're picking people or selecting people because they're the best tactician or they
Mhm.
had the highest score in the war college or,
Mhm.
they got a top PT test or
Mhm.
whatever the numerical value is on a thing. I actually think that one of the best things, and I think the military does a fantastic job of it, is um, you're really selecting people for those types of jobs because they have demonstrated a maturity, a seriousness, and a deliberate thoughtfulness of judgment over time.
Mhm.
And that your judgment skills have been evaluated, that you generally have made choices and
Mhm.
you've made judgments that were sound, logical, mature, thoughtful, and helped the people, helped the organization, accomplish the mission, etc. I mean, I do think um, that is a really important aspect in our society that we need to invest more into. One last point on this is that I think, and I used to say this quite often, that I think there's two kind of commanders. I actually think there's two kinds of officers, but I put it in command because I was a commander. But I also think there's two types of leaders, and there's caretakers and there's fixers.
Mhm.
And a caretaker just basically takes care of his unit, takes care of his organization, but he doesn't really create any change.
Mhm.
He turns it over not too dissimilar to the individuals that replace him without having made an impact. And then there are fixers. And fixers are ones that see challenges, see problems, have a vision, implant identity in their individuals and their organization, provide purpose, give them a mission, and they make change. They fix things, they take risk. They're applauded, but they're also bludgeoned when
Mhm.
deciding to do certain things. And I think we need more fixers and less caretakers. And so I think that that would help, leaders. I think it would help with our values. I think it would help with our country. And so we need to produce more fixers and less caretakers.
A good perspective. Well, General Flynn, do you have any final words of advice or parting thoughts for the audience today?
Yeah, I guess I would say, um, that I think we need people that are dedicated to more work and less
Mhm.
talk, uh, more more acting, less complaining,
Mhm.
uh, more running, less walking, so to speak. That we to the point earlier about you know our adversaries, foes, enemies that are out there. Um, that there's a lot of challenges for the country. The country's been through a ton of challenges before. This is not new to our constitutional republic on the path of the challenges that we've been confronted with.
Mhm.
Um, but we certainly need a greater investment in our people that are fixers, not
Mhm.
caretakers, want to work, want to put in the hard work,
Mhm.
um, talk less, but they're actually producing and they're acting and they're not complaining and they have a sense of urgency uh, to uh, to help our country, help our people, and help expand our freedoms and prosperity. So thanks, Anna. Appreciate it.
Well, I thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your insights and your experiences. Your contributions have impacted so many here in our nation and around the world. So thank you for all that you've done.
Okay, thanks very much. Yep. Have a great winter storm.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. We hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think about the future. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.